Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Joining us, we have someone who is a winning combination of tech insider and sci-fi writer.
She's the author of the Panopticon series, the latest book of which, called Heliotrope, is out now. We'd like to welcome Anne Currie.
Hello, Anne.
Hello.
How are things? We had a little bit of a chat beforehand about the various different bits of software everyone's had to use to chat with each other over the last couple of years. Everything going okay for you?
Everything is going very well for me. Yes. I'm looking forward to the to our discussion, and to hearing your stories. I very good.
So we mentioned a little bit beforehand that you mentioned that you went from painter to author. How long ago was that?
Well, I was never a professional painter. I was always a hobbyist painter, but and I write quite a lot. I've been in the tech industry for nearly 30 years now, and I started doing more writing around tech, and I wrote a tech novel, not a tech novel, a tech non-novel, a tech non-fictional work of art about 4 or 5 years ago now, and I was doing a lot more writing at work, and it just felt like time to turn what I was doing at work into novels about what was happening, because I lecture in tech ethics, and I organise a lot of conferences around tech ethics, and a lot of the issues that were coming up kind of felt like they could be turned into a story about what goes wrong if your tech industry goes wrong.
That is an absolute goldmine. Tech ethics. Full conferences on ethics in tech. That's great.
I don't understand either of those things.
And that's his current job is an IT specialist, so that should worry people. So you organise these conferences. I did for a little while, for 3 or 4 years. I also organised conferences as a day job.
Oh.
How painful do you find it dealing with the coffee orders for these massive conference centres?
Well, actually, the coffee was the easiest bit, because I used a local a local coffee shop in Enfield, which is where I live, to do all the coffee for me. So that was easy. In fact, they also have a podcast, and I've been on their podcast to talk about Utopia 5. So it's all local Enfield businesses that I've been doing.
The coffee shop has a podcast.
They do. It's called Stanton's. They're very good coffee, actually.
Great, go on, give it a proper shout out.
You should. Stanton's Coffee House in Enfield is very, very good indeed. So oddly enough, the coffee was the easy bit. It was organising all the speakers from all over the world to come, and I had a whole load of very good folk, really quite scary folk. An American lawyer who got people out of Guantanamo Bay was my opening speaker, and she was talking about drone observation and drone kills and illegal drone kills being done in Yemen and various places by the US. It was scary stuff.
That's pretty full on.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Just Ben, I'm going to take you. Do you think we should do like less of the silly knob jokes and stuff? I'm just getting like a bit of a vibe.
I wouldn't ask you to remove such a fundamental part of your personality.
Oh, okay. Just as long as my illegal drone strikes don't come up, that's fine.
This is the ethics part of the bit that you're missing, Kiki and Eddie.
The what?
Oh, right. Okay. Well, that is. Then we are going to get into some stories. I think you're going to be reading from the first book in your Panopticon series, Utopia 5, when we get around to that. But first, I think we're going to be doing some stories.
Well, it's actually you today, Ben. You can't.
Bugger.
You're in the drone's eye view.
Oh, you can't do that to me, man. That's horrendous.
No, look through your curtains, Ben.
I watched Syriana recently. This is not a pleasant thought.
Well, before Ben is obliterated by military technology, he's going to read us a story. Our prompt today is taken from Anne's work, and it is Utopia. Take it away.
Okay. Here we are. The interlopers were spoiling the sky. There had been a time when the refracting brilliance of its construction would gather the light of the sun from the ocean above and bathe Libertas in nourishing light. The builders had intended it to be so. They had not intended it to be covered with interlopers. Their dark shapes clumped in places, creating aesthetically displeasing stains of activity on the sky's purity. Clyde didn't like to think of it. No one did. The impact of the interlopers was, he was sure, to remind the people of Libertas that problems could exist. Clyde looked about himself at the clean path he waited in line on. It was flanked either side by fecund and well-irrigated land, used for artistic beauty and bountiful harvests. The path switched back ahead of him, and with it so did the line of young men and women awaiting their time before the crown. Many of them chatted amiably with each other. Some looked deep in thought, and a few of them were looking up. Clyde tilted his chin again and stared into the diffused light of the sky, wondering what they were doing up there. There had been a time when to spot an interloper was so rare it would be remarked upon in conversation. That was a time before societal worry had set in, before the interlopers were spoken of as the only blemish on the lives of the good citizens. Now, their shadows were ever present, and the sounds of their labours could occasionally be heard. It was undeniable they were trying to break the sky and enter Libertas. Yet, only the sky could not be breached. Still, their tooling set Clyde's teeth grinding. At 20 years old, he was eligible for the first time to be brought before the crown. The census had established that more good citizens could be permitted for the 6th consecutive season. Such abundant procreation was unheard of and caused speculation from those too old to be eligible. Clyde found he didn't care much for their idle talk. He'd been enjoying his body and others for years, and was looking forward to the opportunity to create life. The end of the line was marked by a group of good citizens, chosen by lot, to handle proceedings on that day. To each eligible candidate in line, they administered a small jab and then waved them to remove their clothes before entering the glade before the crown. It stung, but the sensation was quickly gone, and with it too went the imposed sterility all were subjected to. Clyde walked on bare feet over the grass slope and looked for his woman. There were some here that he'd already known physically, and they waved a merry greeting at him from their coupling as they saw him. The pleasures of the day had already begun in places, and in others they had quickly concluded. Clyde walked past naked forms curled together and smiled. His partner was waiting for him. The name lot had drawn her as Bonnie at birth, and as children they had played together, evoking another time. That time when people had chosen to steal to transcend the shackles of the old world's reliance on scarcity. Now, their names still felt linked, like they begged for the ampersand. They quickly wrapped each other amid a sea of couples, and vigorously changed the nature of their relationship. Afterwards, Clyde lay back panting and gazed at the crown. The patina metal of her face glowed from within as the fusion reactor pulsed. The power from the crown allowed the good citizens of Libertas to flourish, and always would. The 7 spikes of her crown cast shadows over the glade, and the 25 windows in her brow were illuminated by a dense shifting shade of purple and pink. She, too, thought Clyde, was an echoing memory of that other time. In her was the promise of a better world that humanity had failed to produce before the builders. Her face had been made stern by what she had witnessed, and her head was buried at the neck in the soil of Libertas. A huge noise caused him to twitch and look up, along with everybody else in the crown glade. Thunk! It came again after a brief pause. Thunk! Then again. Thunk! The rhythm of it appeared to establish as continuous, and all eyes were drawn to a dark blot on the sky. The next few days felt strange for Clyde, as his world changed around him and twisted him to fit its new shape. By lot, chosen from the eligible, he and 6 other men were picked for the task of securing the sky. He was told it would not be possible to return once they had left the safety of Libertas. One of the builder's suits was given to him, brought from its place of reverence and activated. With it, he would be able to repair the sky and drive off the interlopers. In training with it, he felt it mould to his body as the internal reactor hummed. Within the suit, all was shaded by the same pink and purple that emitted from the crown. The rivulets of water that had begun to pour down the arches from the crack in the sky gave him the conviction he needed to feel something approximating preparedness. At the ceremony by the airlock, an older citizen spoke well in a speech prepared and agreed upon by the ad hoc assembly that had formed to deal with the crisis. Through the actions of the builders, the good citizens of Libertas have escaped the end of humanity on the surface. A crackling, static screech sounded from above, and the noise resolved into harsh, amplified words. To you, the blood spillers and defilers of the earth, we issue this promise of retribution. You have failed, and what you have done deserves nothing but death. The good citizen, baffled, battled against it with his own voice. In this perfect place, we have lived for generations with no war, poverty, or famine. All is equal and fair. You will drown in your own prison. Today, you depart to defend Libertas. Though you will not return, know that your names will be remembered, along with your valor and sacrifice. We have made the world anew, and there is no place for the progeny of those that scorched the land and committed genocide. One by one, the good citizens who tended the Crown reactor checked the builders' suits and activated their end cycle. Clyde, the last to receive the check, realized it would be his last breath of air from his home, and so he took it in consciously as they sealed him within the suit. The 7 of them were guided into the airlock, which had not been opened in living memory, and shut within. As the airlock filled with dark water, he saw they were partially illuminated by the purple and pink of their reactors. He tried not to look at the countdown clock on his heads-up display. He couldn't think about 0. Through his visor, Clyde saw the same expression of mild panic on the faces of the other men. Each of them now stood well over 3 meters tall, and the ungainly suits would soon be in the water they had been designed for. There was a deep mechanical click which thrummed through the water as the outer door of the airlock was unsealed. Clyde slid it open. Such a task would have been impossible without the suit. Beyond was a darkness so bleak as to feel unreal. He battled a feeling of disconnection for a moment before the others joined him. They propelled themselves upwards as a unit, piloting their suits with a thought. Beneath them, the exterior of the sky twinkled strangely, as dark from this side as it was light from the other. They followed the curve of the sky to reach their enemies. The dark shapes of the interlopers were illuminated by bright lights that fought the darkness. Their equipment upon the dome top of the sky was a hive of activity. Light shone from huge submarines which pointed at Libertas like gigantic sharks. The battle began silently. One of the others propelled himself at maximum speed, surrounding himself with a burning halo of pink energy, and punched through the side of the first submarine. Its lights flickered as it was pushed off its stationary position by the impact. Some of the others attacked the interlopers directly below and began to clear them off the dome with limb-shredding sweeps of their arms. Others attacked the defensive swimming interlopers who had rallied against them. Those interlopers, armoured in shoddy imitations of the builders' suits, wielded plasma-tipped harpoon guns which ignited to burn brightly in the dark ocean waters. Clyde had choked on his intentions, and he knew why. They were people. It had struck him when they had vocalized their threat through the crack they had made. These interlopers were people. A bright harpoon struck him in the side. He felt the heat of it for a moment, but knew a single blow wouldn't pierce his armour. The jolt woke him up, and he acted, needing to find a way to reconcile the peaceful life he had lived with the realities of the world beyond the sky. His target was the enormous hydraulic jackhammer the Revengers had suckered to the dome top. Clyde gripped it by its housing and wrenched it free with one mighty pull, then tossed it into the darkness. In doing so, he saw stress fractures begin to spider-web out from the crack the Revengers had already made. Working quickly, Clyde applied the builder's tool to the surface and began to patch heal as his countdown clock approached its final numbers. His sweat was pooling on the interior of the visor as his arms moved in a blur to finish his work, in enough time to get away before the end cycle self-destruct on his reactor could further damage the dome. Around him, he began to hear the dull detonations of the other suits. One by one, their reactors were going nova amidst the carnage they had created, and ensuring the suits could not be repurposed. Finally, it was done, and Clyde took a breath before preparing to propel himself away from the sky's exterior. The submarine's nose smashed into his back and pinned him in place. The builder's suit partially buckled, and Clyde felt his legs go numb. Desperately, unable to comprehend the pain, he tried to pilot away from the dome top, but the suit would not move. He could hear the whine of the submarine's engines as it put all of its force into keeping him there. Panic, not for himself, but for the world below the sky had filled him. He tried to scream but found he had no breath as his reactor began to hum and the light around him grew brighter. On his visor's display, he saw the numbers trickle away. 3. With the last of his strength, Clyde heaved with the suit and managed to push his chest away by a hand's breadth from the sky. 2. To his dismay, the pressure of it reopened the cracks he had sealed. 1. End cycle complete.
Goodness me.
That was very good.
Tell you what, this strange mix of Atlantis and Rapture got absolutely buggered at the end, didn't it?
Atlantean Rapture. I like it.
It slightly reminded me. Well, obviously, I liked the reference to Planet of the Apes in there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That's very good. I really like stories in that kind of everybody's looked away from an apocalypse kind of thing. Have you ever read Wool, the novel Wool?
No.
You might like it actually. It has similar ideas to the story. It's about people inside something which is effectively Libertas. It's not bad. It trails off a bit. It's a three novel series. It was huge about 10 years ago. The first one is really good. The other two are not quite as good. It trails off a little bit, but yeah, it's that kind of idea of everybody in this last remaining place, and everywhere outside is terribly dangerous. And yeah,
you made excellent use of the perspective of the people in there. This, the little touches in terms of language and the way things were described and seen. You did a good job of, especially once they had breached the sky, of them talking about things that we have more perspective on, to show how it differed. It's a difficult thing to do, and I think you actually captured it really well in that.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think it has that turning point in it that a lot of dystopic fiction has, where there's an other attempting that changes what's happening inside.
Yeah.
Or at least like changes like an understanding of it or an awareness of it. And he obviously has that. This character of Clyde has this sort of revelation that does it quite quickly, possibly too quickly. Maybe it's too
that they're people. But
then he quite quickly he realizes that he still needs to do something. He just doesn't want to kill people to do it. And yeah, maybe that could have used some more words. All in all, this was go on. Sorry,
I was just gonna say it's the scale of the story where that becomes like you had to do it the way you did it because you're writing to a word count.
Yeah, there's a
lot there.
Yeah, there is a lot there, and even so, this went well over the word count. And I think ever since like putting together a novel last year, I really suck at writing to 1,500 words now. I really struggle to cut it down because sometimes it's fine and the story comes out and it's 900 words and I edit it and it goes up to about 1,100 or something. But this one, like I got to about 1,500 and I was like, there's too much story left. It went a few hundred words over, and then I tried to edit it, went through the whole thing a couple of times. I ended up cutting about 2 words from the whole thing, even though I was fully editing multiple sentences.
No, I think you just like the public floggings that come with going over the word count, don't you?
Quite possibly. Yeah.
I know the type.
I
can see it though. It felt like you wanted to tell a way grander story. So, yeah, I think it's one that in a revision, you'd have to change quite a lot if you wanted to get it down to short story, but also,
Yeah.
well, short to the kind of micro fiction that we write normally. But also, I think it's a good enough concept that you could quite easily spin it out into a much longer piece of fiction.
Mm.
Not novel length, unless you like went way out into the world, but even just that sequence of events, I'd say there's 10,000 words of story sitting there waiting to be gobbled up.
Could be. Yeah, I mean, just before we get too far away from it, I just wanted to acknowledge an influence on it, because a few years ago I read it was actually a comic book called Low by Rick Remender, and was absolutely blown away by the sort of subject matter of this like post-apocalyptic sub-ocean society that he was describing. So this has quite a lot of that in there. Nothing's like lifted, but it's definitely heavily inspired. I think anyone that's read Low would be like, "Oh shit, that."
It's a great setting because we know. I mean, I've been over this before. I don't like the ocean because I don't trust it. Because you don't know what the fuck's out there, right?
Same is true of Clapham.
I've been to Clapham. There wasn't anything that, or maybe some of those old men, if they did leave the pubs, they're so used to the atmospheric pressure of that one stall they've sat on for 50 years, they might explode. But you can send a camera to Clapham, send one of these drones to Clapham, and it would have a look around. We could look right out into space. We could look really, really, really far into space. But there is a point in our sea where it's just like, nah, sorry, nothing for you here.
Yeah.
And that's horrible. But it does mean that there's a sense of sort of dread built in and awe that I think it makes it a great setting, especially for something that is kind of an inverted world and has that difference to ours. Like the sea becoming the sky it's crazy.
How do you cut words from your stories, Anne?
Oh, I'm terrible at cutting words from stories. I have the same problem that you have, I think, which is once you've written a novel, it's very hard to be concise. You start to kind of, you want to talk about too much stuff. I mean, I thought that short story was pretty concise in that there were loads of questions that were left open. You know, what's the world outside like? What have the people inside the dome been doing? You know, outside to the outside world? Were they the baddies? Are they the goodies? It almost felt like the first chapter of a novel series.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah,
I want to know what the criteria for getting a shag pass was. That seems like
it was. I think it was like health and age related.
all four limbs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was pretty much it. Yeah. But I think whenever you're writing, trying to describe a utopia, you kind of need to go into like what they think a utopia is and how how they think they've managed to achieve that.
Yeah.
And this was through population control and post scarcity with this fusion reactor that was kicking out huge amounts of energy. So they just lived in this idyllic place that they'd made perfect and then sunk in the ocean with a absolutely banging fusion reactor inside the Statue of Liberty's head. It's got some metal to it. So it was actually partially inspired by the news story earlier this week of the Jet Laboratory breaking its own power output record.
Ah, yes.
The fusion reactor. And I watched the video because they took a video of like inside the reactor as it was happening, and that's where the pink and purple light comes from because that's what it looked like inside the reactor. At least on the camera, anyway. You've got to wonder what kind of filters required for a camera to survive that scenario is.
Well, indeed.
If anyone could tell us, it's you, surely, Anne.
Well, yes, and I don't know. I would imagine that there was a fair amount of CGI involved in that video.
Could be. Looked great though. So the CGI budget was well spent, in my opinion. Yes. Anyway, so this was my interpretation, or at least my go at the Utopia prompt.
Mm.
Interesting one to go at, I think, because you have to do quite a lot of world building and then story as well. So I'll be interested to see how Nick does it later on.
Badly.
But for now, do you want to hit us with the excerpt from Utopia 5? Maybe with a bit of context might be useful.
Yes. Yep. So I'm ready to go with that.
Perfect.
So yeah, this is an excerpt from the first book in the Panopticon series, which is a speculative fiction series set. The first book is set in 2053. And in the excerpt, it's about halfway through the book, and the main character of the whole series, Lee Sands, discusses their job, which is creating metaverses for games, which are sometimes utopias and sometimes dystopias. So that is the subject of this excerpt. So the chapter is called Happiness, and it's set in the analog world, 2053. Sandy was looking at me as if I'd killed someone. Actually, he thought I'd killed several 100 billion people. He just hadn't realised that yet. I'd often noticed his current expression didn't scale anyway. People looked equally horrified whether they momentarily believed I'd killed one person or 1 million. I knew that because I had this conversation all the time. The people in sim worlds are not AIs, I explained gently. They aren't people. They're completely fictional, like characters in a novel or a film. They do exactly what the script says. It's just their script has lots of if this and else that's in it, which makes you feel like you're talking to someone who's responding. The game is designed to get you to anthropomorphize the denizens. Sandy appeared confused. To make you think they're real when they're just emulations, pretend. I paused, trying to think of a good example. If you don't want bad things to happen to denizens, you might as well say you don't want bad things to happen to characters in books. Sandy looked at me as if he might indeed prefer that. But they seem real, he protested. That's why you would never shoot anyone. He obviously hadn't upgraded to premium, I thought. Sandy's father, Stone, broke in. I think what Lee is saying is the denizens are not real. They don't have souls like us. Put them in a situation they don't have a script for, and they just stop, not like a person. I didn't correct him, but that hadn't been what I was saying. Stone was wrong when he said that in a new situation a denizen would just stop. They borrowed from human psychology to handle unfamiliar environments. Nautilus chose a familiar event for our denizen to treat like the new one they'd just encountered. Say a steamroller was driving towards a denizen version of me. I'd never had that happen to me in real life. It would be an unknown situation. Nautilus might tell the denizen me to treat it like a slow-moving car, and they would get out of the way rather than hang around to be run over. Sometimes Nautilus didn't even pick great analogies. They were randomly selected to trigger any action. Ironically, I often thought that was when the denizens seemed most human. My problem with denizens was not kidding myself they were real. They were just bits of code with a random number generator in place of free will. They certainly didn't have a magical soul. My problem was wondering how we could know that we weren't just characters following a script too. But there wasn't much point worrying about that. What could I do about it? If denizens were true artificial intelligences, every Lee Sands would probably suspect it was silicon. In almost every world, the local version you've made created denizens. That might make a true AI doubt its own reality. Fortunately, my denizens didn't live in a state of permanent existential angst because they weren't AIs, they were bots. There's a big difference. They didn't have an internal life to obsess about their internal life. I envied them. Laura broke into my thoughts. You said you separate worlds into dystopias and utopias. How do you decide what's a good world and what's a bad one? I was surprised. Most people didn't ask that. They assumed it was obvious. It wasn't. Over the past 10 years, I'd remade the world hundreds of times, and in most cases, it wasn't clear whether the update was an improvement on the real world or not. I told Laura about some of the tools I'd built to help me judge how good a world was. The simplest was what I called my Ben thermometer. It used facial emotion recognition. Smiling or laughing denizens were happy. Crying, sneering, or grimacing ones were sad. That was the gist. I used an off-the-shelf sentiment analysis library to do the work. That stuff had been nailed years ago by pre-36 marketers. I can only look at measurable experienced happiness, I told her. Life satisfaction or remembered happiness isn't something the panopticon has data on. Denizens can't emulate it. How happy are denizens, or people? Laura wondered. I told her it depended when you asked. Are they eating a donut or stubbing their toe? How happy is a denizen was a more difficult question to answer than it sounds. Over what time period should I sample their apparent emotional states, and how frequently? Should I integrate, sum up, I said to Sandy when he looked confused, the happiness of a sim world over all time, or just for the sim equivalent of today, or the past week, or the last year? What about different regions or different cultures? What if half the world was delighted with life and half utterly miserable? And how should I weight extremes into the world's happiness score? Was a person crying over the death of their child twice as significant as someone crying from being left by their lover? Or 10 times? Or 1,000? What about creatures other than humans? I told Laura, so I tried to learn from real examples. I looked at the hot summer. The hot summer, as recorded in Control, was great dystopian material. It was well documented by the panopticon, with plenty of human misery. Easy. 2036 was a dystopia. However, as soon as things got slightly better, everyone got happy again. The world in 37 was objectively shit, but most people thought it was great compared to running away from a tornado inferno. When I ran emotional samples on Control in 2037, most people were either dead, in which case they didn't count, or relieved and happy to still be alive. Did that mean 37 was a utopia? Sampling only that year, my happiness algorithm said yes. At the same time, we hadn't fixed any of our problems yet, and most people were living in refugee centres. By no sane measure was 37 a great world, except for inhabitants comparing it with the previous year. I described to Laura how I'd wondered if the right algorithm might be inspired by religion. As each denizen died, I could sum up the good and bad emotions they'd experienced throughout their lives and add it to a running score for the world. The problem was that was too long-term for the Nautilus worlds. They only stretched back 28 years, so when the panopticon was switched on. Any scenes before 2025 were just reconstructions. 28 years didn't give me much full lifespan data. Of course, I said, all those measurements were just for my own interest. I finally gave up and we only published the obvious worlds. I decided it was a dystopia if at least half the populace were running around like rabid zombies, and a utopia if the tech was cool. Sandy nodded enthusiastically. Ideally both, he said. He was squarely back in my target demographic. Is my excerpt?
Oh, yeah, fascinating stuff. Really loved the flow of it. I really felt like it was dragging me along neural pathways I don't use very much.
that is its whole point.
Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. I love the comparison between a good year and a bad year. Like one, even though it's objectively shit, it's much better than the previous one.
Absolutely hooked on that.
Yeah,
on the people who are happy and ready to be alive, and that as a data subset on its own implies actual happiness. That made me extremely happy to have it broken down in that way.
Quantify it in a data set, yeah. Oh, brilliant stuff. So there are 6 books in this Panopticon series.
Yes, I've been working on book 7 today, actually.
Book 7, wow.
Yeah, and I'm in the first draft stage, so everything's going to the wall as I forget everything else in life.
That's always the way, isn't it? When your inner worlds begin to take over. Yeah, I can't go over that. I mean, that reads well. It sounds like from the way that you read it that it would read so fresh, but not in a light way. In like a, you could really take some left and right turns and people would follow you.
Well,
as a narrator.
It is meant to be. So actually, I'm quite pleased because that's the first time that I have publicly narrated any of it. I was a bit unsure about what style to take.
Right.
So my husband, who is a big fan, fortunately, and sometimes unfortunately, because he's always moaning at me to write another one, said, you should just write it. You should just read it in your normal voice because that's how I hear it in my head. So I thought, well, might as well.
Yeah.
I think it worked perfectly well for the character.
Yeah, I think it worked. I think it worked very nicely.
He also did a wonderful thing with having it be explained to someone in the book in simple terms. So you get to feel good about yourself for understanding, and it's not you that's the dum-dum. It's
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Sandy. Thank goodness for Sandy.
It's funny. It's like the Star Trek thing where they quickly sum up a way that they're going to solve the problem. I mean, they do it in a far more limited, basic sense than the way that you did it. But like, you know, this idea of just being like, here's some jargon, and then here's it for the cheap seats sort of thing.
Mm.
That is a bit of a mainstay in science fiction, isn't it? Of like how to explain something quite complex and in some cases made up.
I think most situations could be solved by jettisoning the dilithium crystals, Ben.
Yeah, you've got to just inject the dilithium crystals.
Yeah, I have to say, although I love Star Trek, I deliberately went down the route with the Panopticon series of not having any technology that didn't actually exist, or mostly is already commercially available. Sure. So I stretched it a little bit by the end of the series, which is set further into the future. But not that much, really. I'm trying to put in things that are already, at least in kind of in the lab and proven technologies. Dilithium crystals. I have to say, I mean, I love it. You need it because otherwise you can't do the whole thing. But it makes it kind of a little bit like fantasy rather than sci-fi.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, it's definitely space fantasy, isn't it? In the same way that Star Wars is a bit is space fantasy as well.
Oh, it's just a fantasy.
Yeah, with spaceships.
It's a samurai movie.
Yes, yeah, it's a fantasy samurai movie.
And I love fantasy. You know, I'm not dissing fantasy. I love fantasy, but for this, because I was trying to kind of tell a story about what was actually happening, I limited it. And now I've kind of tied myself in that I can't invent anything.
I can't remember where I read it, but I was reading an article somewhere about how loads of our actual real world tech now looks like a lot of the Star Trek tech, because loads of people who liked Star Trek as children became scientists and went out of their way to emulate that technology.
Consciously or subconsciously, I guess.
It's we're getting close. Soon we'll have no currency and big flat spaceships. It'll be fine.
Well, there's all kinds. There are all kinds of concepts in Star Trek that we now accept. I mean, for technology that doesn't exist, fortunately. But had we not had Star Trek, we would be much more questioning about it. So, for example, the transporter breaks down into little bits and builds a complete replica of you somewhere else. And nowadays, if there was if somebody offered a transporter, loads of people would get in it. I think everybody would go, "Oh, transporter, that's great."
Yeah, for sure.
But what are they playing at? What are they thinking? It kills you.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. They're going to be dead in 12 seconds.
Yeah. Although there is that cool episode where they completely abuse that technology to bring Riker back from the dead, and they never do it again. Even when crew members die, they're not, and they've clearly used the transporter at some point. They don't bother going back and resurrecting them. It's bonkers.
Someone puts the big barrel of magic tribble bud behind the transporter and says, "This room's locked now. No one's allowed in here."
No one can come in here. So are you more of a I'm trying to think of another sci-fi TV, The Expanse? Are you more of like The Expanse kind of end of science fiction?
I have to say, it's a terrible admission, but I've not read The Expanse, and everybody says I've got to read The Expanse, and I'm slightly put off reading things that I think might overlap too much with my stuff. I think, I'll finish I've got a 10-book series. I'm going to finish it, and then I won't. But if I read The Expanse, I might find it turning into The Expanse.
Yeah, okay, I can get that. I can get behind that. I think that I can see why there might be an overlap just from having experienced the two now. But I think The Expanse leans more towards the engineering side of things and physics, whereas this is more towards the technological and sort of almost like software end of things, isn't it?
Yeah, but I go for by book 3 is very physics. When I get into
Okay, right, fair
space,
enough.
when I get into space, I think it probably it's pure physics. It's a lot. It's more kind of Arthur C. Clarke physics. So the same stuff that he patented in the 50s actually happening in space, because all perfectly plausible stuff. I would imagine that the Expanse is covering almost the same technology, because it's the obvious technology for space that has been that Arthur C. Clarke patented in the 50s and will be used. So I that's one of the reasons why I've been kind of avoiding it, just in case.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, I can see what I wish you all the best with it for once you've completed your 10-book series, because I think you might like it, judging from the way that you seem to interact with the science fiction. I tell you what, I really enjoyed that. I also had the question because there was the bit where they try to use the religion as the model, but they don't have enough data. Does that at all come from the sort of common usage of Utopia from Thomas More?
It doesn't actually. And I should have read that. Should I be reading that before I read The Expanse?
I don't think so. Like it's a piece of like 15th, 16th century trash. Like, and unless you, yeah, I know, right? Well, I think it was in like 2000 he got made the patron saint of statesmen or something. Catholicism's wild, man.
Have 2 miracles to be sainted, isn't that the? That's the rule, isn't
yeah,
it?
but you can just claim anything's a miracle.
Fudge 'em.
It's just fudge it. Yeah.
Being able to read without moving your lips was a miracle.
I thought I had one, and now I don't. That's
the real reason Henry VIII offed him, because he called him on that.
A witch! A witch!
Oh, brilliant! Well, thank you very much. I'm intrigued, and the idea that it properly goes into space and stuff in book 3 is really cool. So you can get all these via your website or via Amazon. What's the best?
Oh yeah, Amazon. So if you search for the Panopticon series or Utopia 5 and you spell out the words, because Amazon is terrible. The search for author names is terrible. If you search for Anne Currie, you'll only see Indian food recipes. So you need to search for Utopia 5, 2 words, and you'll see all of them come up. They're extraordinarily cheap.
We know the pain. If you try to find our story anthology, you find a lot of very small bookcases.
Yes, yeah, you literally get redirected to the home section. It's rather amusing. Right, okay. Well, he's not going to get off the hook. Nick, let's.
Who's that? Who?
Yeah, it's you, my friend, Nico.
Are you doing a story now, Ben?
You don't want to hear mine again. It was way too long.
We haven't the time. Right, go on then. Utopia. Grandfather, I say, can I ask you a question? The warm voice I've been comforted by so many times responds, as always, a little pedantic. Course you can. Your tongue works, doesn't it? I laugh at the joke. I laugh at all of his little jokes. Most of them are not very funny, if the truth is to be told. They're all very simple. They follow a theme of pointing out the obvious and then adding some kind of soft barb to it. Never cruel, but somehow also not kind. But of course you may ask me as many questions as you want. Okay, grandfather, may I ask you a question? I wait as the wry smile spreads across his face. The wrinkles at the corners of his mouth deepen first, then the ones around his eyes. It's a beautiful thing when he smiles. All those folds of weathered skin bunching up together, as though his years of life move aside to let happiness take over his face. You may? What do the arches do? He thinks for a long moment, as though the facts are lining up in his head before they can march out of his mouth. That's a complicated question. See, when they were building them, that politician, Prowse or something, a really smart guy, well, he got together with all the scientists to fix the climate change problem. What's that? I ask all the right questions. I know how to keep him talking, because I so dearly love the opportunity to listen. He scratches behind an ear, then instinctively checks under his fingernails. It's a habit I've picked up from him, though I don't know what it is I'm looking for. But if he does it, there has to be a reason. Well, see, everything was getting hotter or colder or something like that. All these companies, see, they were making things and burning things and wasting things, and end of it all, there was nothing much left save a bunch of plastic crap. I giggled at the cuss word. I like the way he says it very much. I've never seen anything plastic, and Grandfather hasn't been able to explain it to me, but I imagine it to be dreadful. It must have been bad if it made us need the arches. What was I saying? He looks past me, into some unknown point way beyond the visible. He looks into his memory, which isn't what it once was. I prompt him gently, because I know that it helps. The arches. Right. He brushes something from his knees. The sound of his coarse hands against cloth is oddly calming. I can hear strength in the movement. If those were my knees being swatted at, I would have buckled and found myself looking at him from my back. You see, the arches, they were supposed to make these magical little bubbles. He rubs at his chin. The coarse grey bristles there seem to squirm aside around his digits. These places with the right temperature, good air, healthy wildlife. I mean, I can't believe no one had fish, real fish, for 15 years before they put them up. Boy, the people at the first Lake Fremted, I say quietly. Yeah, the Danish place. They were nuts about having the fish back. Of course, it was so expensive at first, no one could get it. He looks so sad when he talks about this time. Long before I was born, of course. But it makes me feel sad too. Of course, after that they decided, what's the point in having all this good stuff, the fish and venison and clean water if not everyone can get at it? He has the faraway look again. I wait patiently because I know he'll break the silence soon, and I could manage the moments between now and then. So they decided, they being them human liberation folks, that we didn't want to have money anymore. Hooray for the poor folk, right? Perfect little world, right there. Oh, what was that word your nan used to use? Utopian. Utopian. I repeat the word. The feel of it in my mouth is wonderful. It bobs up and down in all the ways that a good word should. Of course, all them big wigs that fronted all the billions of dollars or krona or whatever it was to pay for the things weren't too happy about it. But then they had the technology now, so a whole bunch of them, they took it. Pretty sure it was Saturn. Now they got their little bubble there, and no one's paying for our arches to stay running. I've heard this story so many times, and I know what's coming. A tear breaks the weather-beaten face, leaving a pale line down it. I want to reach out and wipe it away, but I know that it won't do anything. So I just ask the next question. So what happened? Well, they stopped. After a while, people started fighting. Rumours would come out that one was working somewhere, so caravans of people would move en masse. Who even knows if anyone made it? He looks down. He doesn't see me. I wish he would. And people started dying. On account of the heat and the water and that. He looks right into my eyes then. This is the bit that scares me the most, but I live for it. So I'm recording this for you. You're only small now, and I know you're right in front of me, but somebody has to remember. Somebody needs to know what happened. Someone will survive this and know how we let this planet roast. His hand reaches for the head of his true grandchild. Whatever comes next, and whenever you look back on this, know that I love you. And you're going to make it. I love you too, Grandpa. I forgot to join in that time. It sounds so strange in that stranger child's voice. The screen blinks out then. I feel the cold metal of the recording device in my fingers. Gone now is grandfather, and the idea of hope. The device is so very old. His skin looks different to mine. No sores, no burns. I wonder who that real grandchild was. I wonder who he was. It's taken me so long to learn all the conversations this well. So long that now there are only a few single digits of battery left on the device. They say the tower at the lake is still running. If I get there, I'll tell them about what happened to the world. I'll tell them about the Utopia.
Very cool. Very good.
What a twist.
It was very good.
That was thoroughly enjoyable. I really enjoyed the twist. Very well deployed twist, I would say.
I've been eating my Weetabix.
Eating your Weetabix.
You got me hooked on twists, man.
I do like twists.
I believe your exact words were, most good short stories have a twist, and now I can't stop. Just want to be good.
It was really good. It was excellent. It was, it was, and the twist was very, very well done. I was not expecting it.
No, I think it's possibly due to how well you created the atmosphere of the room that it felt like we were in.
Yeah.
So then to suddenly take a step back and be like, oh no, we're not in that room. Oh wait, there's time between these two things. Oh God, what's happened? Was a really nice mental process to go down. Possibly the construction of the grandfather was a big part of that. Like that right at the start, this idea that someone can be sort of joshing about and joking with you, and they're not being cruel, but they're not being kind either.
Yeah,
that's a really succinct way to sum up. I suspect a lot of people can really identify with that and relate to that kind of relationship with people, whether it's grandfathers or co-workers or whatever it is.
And in retrospect, that was a clue, wasn't it? Because it was a very at one remove observation to make. It was a really good observation. But if somebody really was in front of their actual grandfather live, might not make that observation. It's the kind of thing that you come to later in life, isn't it?
That's true. Yeah.
There's a few in there. They made an effort to put them in. There's things like I don't respond because I know he's going to say something else in a second.
Yeah.
I want to reach out and take the tear away, but I know it won't do anything. And I do like that double meaning gets to kind of snap into place. That was a fun thing to play with.
The rather uncomfortable your tongue works, doesn't it? Was a little bit, noncy.
I knew you. I actually, when I wrote, I was like, Ben's going to say something about this.
I think just commenting on how anybody, like a child's tongue works, is just deeply uncomfortable.
I think you're reading too much into that.
It's possible. It's possible. It's quite difficult not to situate it in that context when you read the news every day at the moment, isn't it?
Oh, that's true. Oh no.
But I like what you're saying there about putting all the clues in, because I do the same thing. You have to do that. And if there's any kind of clue, or there's going to be any kind of reveal, or even without a twist, it's a whodunit type thing, and at the end, more information will be revealed that some of the characters have all the way through, and some of the main character, doesn't necessarily have all the way through. But you worry that you kind of then want people to read it again with that information.
Yeah.
And a short story is not too bad because you remember, but in a novel,
with in a short story, that's kind of what you're looking for in a way, isn't it? Because I remember somebody telling me once that a short story should make you almost want to read it again straight away. Just because it was so like juicy and it had some stuff that now makes more sense, that kind of thing. And I think you completely nailed it in that story. Really enjoyed it, and again, like wonderful narration, like that sort of grandfather's voice, and then of course the sort of the reveal sort of happening around the fact that the person doesn't perfectly sync up the voice again, and so we get this like very saccharine child voice that you can do. Cutting, yeah, it was pretty. It was like a lance, that bit. I could really feel it. Very nice work. I enjoyed that a lot.
It was a fun thing to write, and it's. I think it's really interesting that all three of our pieces, obviously, when you're talking about Utopia, you're going to touch on the dystopic as well. But Ben and I both, first of all, the link was there. We both used the term archers in our stories.
Oh yeah.
But our utopias were definitely past the sell-by dates. We are not happy people.
Yeah, I did notice your utopias were definitely had more than a slight hint of dystopia in them. Yeah.
I think that's sort of, as you were saying before, like when you're writing about utopias, you tend to be talking a lot about dystopias as well, because fundamentally there isn't actually that much like dramatic tension in a utopia, is there?
No.
I reckon we could get 1,500 words out of nice today, isn't it? Yes, and tomorrow.
But that's where the point of view comes in, doesn't it? And reframing it, and you reframed wonderfully inside that story. So yeah, I thought that was pretty good. I really enjoyed your excerpt as well, Anne.
I enjoyed all of them. I thought both your stories were excellent.
Brilliant. Very glad to hear it. Very kind. We do like doing the thing where we draw the prompt from somebody else's work and then go for it. We've been doing a lot of what we call write-like episodes at the moment, where we take on a prompt in sort of homage or style of a famous author of some kind. So we've done who have we done so far? We've done Hunter S. Thompson, Jane Austen, and Tom Clancy are the ones out at the moment. Both. I think Nico said before we came online that it was kind of weird going. He was like, "Whose style am I writing in?" Yours.
Oh no.
So to have such a broad prompt as Utopia and then be trying to dial back in as us was kind of cool. So this was a lot of fun.
And lovely to have a guest.
Yeah. It's difficult always talking about dead people. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?